Hey everyone, I guess I never thought I'd be the guy writing on here, but life's full of surprises, right? So here I am. I'm Jake, 36, and I've been married to my wife, Sarah, for 5 years. Things were good, or at least I thought they were. We had the kind of relationship people seem to envy. No major fights, both of us doing well at work, no kids yet, and a nice house in the suburbs. But then about 6 months ago, I started noticing little things that didn't feel right. Sarah has always been independent, maybe a little too much at times, but recently, she'd been more distant. I chalked it up to stress at first. She's in marketing, and her job can be demanding. Long hours, late nights, all the usual stuff. But then her behavior started changing in ways that I couldn't ignore anymore. First, she became super protective of her phone. Now, don't get me wrong, I've never been the type to snoop. I trusted her completely, so I never even thought twice about what she did on her phone. But suddenly, she was always hiding the screen, flipping it face down whenever we were together. If I walked into a room while she was texting, she'd quickly lock it, like she didn't want me to see. Then came the girls' nights. She'd always had them, so at first I didn't think much of it. But they became more frequent, and she'd get home later and later. I'm talking 1 or 2 a.m. Some nights, she wouldn't even wake me up when she came back, and other nights, she'd just give some vague excuse about losing track of time. When I asked her about it, she'd get defensive, saying I was being paranoid. Can't a girl have fun with her friends without being questioned all the time? She'd snap at me, rolling her eyes like I was the one acting out of line. That's when I started feeling like maybe something bigger was going on. But I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. I guess part of me was scared to find out the truth. After the whole phone thing and the constant girls' nights, I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I wanted to trust Sarah, like I always had, but it just kept getting worse. One night, she came home way later than usual, around 3 a.m. this time. She stumbled in, half drunk, but tried to play it off like it was no big deal. "Sorry, babe. We got caught up talking," she slurred, before quickly changing the subject. When I asked who she was with, she just said the usual names, Jessica, Kelly, and a few other friends I'd never even met. But here's the thing that really threw me off. The next day, I got up early for work, and her phone was left on the counter. That never happened. Sarah always kept it glued to her. While making coffee, I saw it light up with a notification, some random name. Dan, it wasn't a message, just a missed call at 2 a.m. Who's calling my wife at 2 a.m.? I asked her about it later, casually, pretending I hadn't seen the name. "Hey, did you get a call last night? I heard your phone buzzing." Her response was way too quick, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. "Oh yeah, that was just Kelly's friend. We were trying to get an Uber, and my phone was dead, so she used us to call mine." She shrugged it off, but something in her voice felt off. The more she talked, the more I started noticing the small lies stacking up. I didn't push it right then, but my gut was screaming that there was more going on. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not without something solid. But that call? That was the first real crack in the story she'd been spinning. Stay tuned for what happens next. It only gets worse from here. The whole Dan thing stuck with me. I couldn't get it out of my head. Sarah brushed it off so quickly, but I knew something wasn't right. After that, I started paying closer attention, not in a creepy, controlling way, but just enough to notice when things didn't add up. And they didn't. More often than not. A few days later, Sarah had another girls' night planned. This time, I decided to ask about it while she was getting ready. She was all dressed up more than usual, and I couldn't help but feel a knot forming in my stomach. "Who's going tonight?" I asked, pretending to be casual. "The usual. Jess, Kelly, maybe a few others," she said without even looking at me, focused on putting on her lipstick. "Where are you guys going?" I pressed, keeping my voice light. "Some bar downtown. Not sure which one yet." It all felt vague, rehearsed. Something in her voice wasn't convincing, like she didn't even care enough to make the lie sound believable. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked Jessica. "Yeah, I know it sounds bad, But Jessica and I had always been cool, so I figured it wouldn't seem too weird if I casually brought it up in conversation. That night, while Sarah was out, I texted Jess, asking if they were out. Her reply came quickly, "Oh, hey. No, I stayed in tonight. Haven't seen Sarah in a while, actually." "Why?" "She's out." My stomach dropped. Sarah had lied. She wasn't with Jessica or any of the other people she mentioned. She was somewhere else. I stared at the screen, unsure of what to do next. Should I call her out right then? Should I wait until she got home? The trust one had in her was slowly crumbling, and this was the first solid proof I had that something was seriously wrong. But I wasn't ready for the confrontation. Not yet. I needed to know for sure. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up waiting for her to come home, my mind spinning with every worst-case scenario. When she finally walked in around 2 a.m., I didn't say a word. I just watched her carefully, and all she said was, "It was fun, but I'm exhausted." No mention of who she was really with. That's when I knew I had to find out the truth. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was hiding something bigger. The lie about Jessica, the vague answers, the late nights, it was all starting to build up in my mind. I felt like I was being played, and I couldn't let it go. I decided it was time to stop giving her the benefit of the doubt. I knew she wasn't going to just admit what was going on, so I needed to find out for myself. I felt guilty even thinking about it, but I started checking her phone more carefully. Not snooping through her messages, just glancing when she left it out, noticing when Dan would pop up again. And sure enough, he did. Frequently. A lot more than I was comfortable with. One day, I waited until she was in the shower and unlocked her phone. I know. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I had to know. I opened her messages, and there it was, an entire thread with Dan. At first glance, nothing seemed too suspicious. A lot of talk about work and random things. But then I scrolled up to the older messages and found what I had been dreading. "Dan, can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. Sarah." "Me too. I've been thinking about it all day." My heart sank. There it was, plain as day. She had been sleeping with him. I felt like the room was spinning. My first instinct was to storm into the bathroom and confront her right then and there, but I stopped myself. I needed to be smart about this. If I went in there angry, it would just turn into a screaming match, and I wouldn't get any answers. So I took a screenshot of the conversation and emailed it to myself, just in case she tried to delete it later. When she got out of the shower, she was acting like everything was normal. I couldn't even look at her the same way. My head was pounding, and I felt sick to my stomach, but I kept quiet. I needed time to figure out what I was going to do next. I had the proof. Now it was time for the confrontation. I couldn't hold it in much longer. The weight of knowing she was cheating on me with Dan was eating me alive. A couple of days passed, and every time I looked at her, I felt this boiling anger underneath the surface. She acted so casual, so normal, like nothing was wrong. It only made me more furious. One evening I decided it was time. We were sitting on the couch, watching some random show, and she was scrolling through her phone, laughing at something. I could feel my heart pounding, and I knew I had to do it right then or I'd explode. I turned to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah, who's Dan?" Her face froze for a second, just a split second, but I caught it. Then she quickly recovered, giving me a confused look. "Dan? He's just a guy from work." "Why?" I didn't let her off that easily. "Just a guy from work? Then why are you texting him at 2 a.m., saying things like, 'Last night was amazing'?" Her face went pale. She blinked, trying to come up with anything, but she was caught. "Jake, it's not what you think," she said, her voice shaking. "We're just friends." It's nothing serious. It's just a joke." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "A joke? You're going to tell me that sleeping with someone else is a joke?" She got defensive, her tone suddenly sharp. "I didn't sleep with him, okay? You're overreacting. You always blow things out of proportion." That was it. I was done with the excuses. "I saw the messages, Sarah. I know what's been going on. Don't lie to me anymore. She opened her mouth to respond, but then she just shut it, realizing there was no point. She couldn't lie her way out of this one. Instead, she sighed heavily, rubbing her temples like I was the one causing her a headache. Fine. Yeah? We slept together a couple of times. It didn't mean anything. It's just been, I don't know, stress, and I wasn't thinking straight. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A couple of times? I asked, my voice thick with hurt. How long has this been going on? She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. A few months. But it's not like it's serious. I don't even know why I did it. I'm sorry, okay? Can we just move on from this? Move on? Like this was some minor thing we could just sweep under the rug? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't even process it fully. I told her I needed space and walked out of the house. I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet, but one thing was clear. Our marriage would never be the same again. Next, I'll talk about what came after. The emotional roller coaster that followed. It was a mess. Stay tuned. After I walked out of the house, I just drove. I didn't have a destination in mind, I just needed to be anywhere but near her. My mind was spinning with everything Sarah had just admitted. She had been cheating for months, and now she expected us to move on like it was a bad argument, something we could sweep under the rug. I parked in an empty lot, turned off the car, and sat there, staring at the dashboard. It was like I couldn't feel anything at first, just numbness. But then, slowly, the anger hit. How could she do this? After everything we had built, after trusting her for so long, she had been sneaking around behind my back. It felt like my entire world had collapsed in an instant. And the excuses she gave? It didn't mean anything, and I wasn't thinking straight. How do you not think straight for months? She acted like I should just forgive and forget, like her betrayal wasn't a big deal. I was furious, not just at her, but at myself too. How had I missed the signs? Why did I let it go on for so long without digging deeper? I stayed in that parking lot for what felt like hours. I thought about every girl's night, every phone call, every moment she had lied to my face. And it made me feel sick. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice she made over and over again. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to walk away from everything, to just end it right there. But another part of me was still hanging on, still hoping that maybe, somehow, we could fix this. After all, we'd been together for so long, and I couldn't imagine my life without her. But could I ever trust her again? I ended up crashing at a friend's place that night. I didn't tell him the whole story, just said Sarah and I had a huge fight and I needed space. He didn't push for details, thankfully, but he could tell something was seriously wrong. I spent the night on his couch, tossing and turning, wondering how my life had come to this. When I finally got back home the next day, Sarah was waiting for me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She started apologizing again, but it all felt hollow. I didn't know if it was guilt or if she was just sorry she got caught. Either way, the damage was done, and I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. I told her I needed more time, and she nodded, backing off. The next few days were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. I went from wanting to scream at her to feeling completely drained, like I didn't have the energy to even deal with the situation. I kept asking myself the same question. Was this the end of our marriage? I wasn't ready to answer that yet. The next part was figuring out what to do, stay or go. Keep reading, things get more complicated from here. The days following our confrontation were some of the hardest I've ever gone through. Every time I looked at Sarah, I was hit with a wave of emotions, anger, disappointment, and weirdly enough, sadness. She tried to act normal, going about her daily routine like nothing had happened, but we both knew it was just a matter of time before we had to talk about it again. I spent a lot of time in my head, weighing my options. Could we really fix this? Could I forgive her? The truth is, I wasn't sure I even wanted to. I had always seen myself as someone who would walk away if something like this happened. But when you're actually in that situation, it's not so black and white. 7 years together, plans for the future, everything we had. It wasn't something you could just walk away from without thinking about what you'd lose. But what about trust? How could I ever believe anything she said again? Every time she left the house, I'd wonder where she was really going. If she was late coming home, I'd immediately jump to the worst conclusion. It felt like I was trapped between two impossible choices: stay and live with the doubt, or leave and start over from scratch. Sarah wasn't making it any easier. She apologized a lot, sure, but it wasn't the kind of apology that comes with real understanding. It was like she was more sorry for getting caught than for what she had done. She kept saying it didn't mean anything, that it was a mistake, but I couldn't wrap my head around how you accidentally sleep with someone for months. And to make it worse, she still didn't seem to understand why I wasn't just moving on from it. I said, "I'm sorry, Jake. What more do you want from me?" she asked one night when I brought it up again. Her voice had that sharp edge to it, like she was getting frustrated with me for not letting it go. "What do I want?" I snapped. "I want to know why you did it. I want to know if you were ever going to tell me, or if I'd still be in the dark if I hadn't caught you. And I want to know how I'm supposed to trust you again." She just sighed, like she was tired of the conversation. "I already told you it didn't mean anything. I don't know what else to say." That was the problem. She didn't have anything else to say. She didn't have an explanation that made sense. And that left me feeling like there was nothing solid to hold on to. One night I decided to call my brother, Matt. We're close, but I hadn't told him much about what was going on because I wasn't sure how he'd react. When I finally spilled the whole story, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Man, I don't know what to tell you," he said finally. "That's brutal. But if she's not giving you a real reason, I don't know how you can come back from that." His words hit me hard, but they were honest. I knew I couldn't just ignore what happened, but I wasn't ready to throw away everything either. I was stuck. I spent the next few days in this mental limbo, torn between staying and leaving. Every time I thought I had made a decision, the doubt would creep back in. It felt like no matter what I chose, I'd lose something. What I didn't know at the time was that things were about to take another turn. This whole mess wasn't over yet. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. A few days after my conversation with Matt, Sarah came home from work acting strange. She was quieter than usual, almost like she was waiting for something. I could feel the tension in the air, but I didn't want to push it. I figured maybe she was finally realizing how much damage she had done to our marriage. That night, I was in the kitchen making dinner when she walked in, her arms crossed and a look on her face I couldn't quite read. She stood there for a moment, like she was trying to figure out how to say something. Finally, she just blurted it out. "I'm late," she said. I froze mid-chop. "Late for what?" She sighed heavily. "Late. As in, I think I might be pregnant." Time seemed to stop. I turned to face her, my heart racing. "Pregnant? What do you mean you think?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I haven't taken a test yet, but I'm late by over a week." My mind went into overdrive. The thought of having a child right now, especially in the middle of all this, was overwhelming. But then a much darker thought hit me, and I couldn't hold back the question that came out next. "Is it mine?" The words hung in the air between us, and for the first time since all of this had started, Sarah looked genuinely hurt. "What? Of course it's yours, Jake. How could you even ask that?" "How could I ask that?" I repeated, my voice rising. "How could I not? You've been sleeping with Dan for months. How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" She stood there in silence for a long time, tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not after everything she had done. "I don't know for sure," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if it's yours or his." And there it was. The final blow. I couldn't breathe. My mind was spinning with 1,000 different emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak. How had it come to this? How had I gone from trusting this woman with my life to standing in my kitchen, wondering if the baby she might be carrying wasn't even mine? I didn't say anything else. I just walked out. I couldn't deal with it right then. I needed air. I needed space. I ended up driving around aimlessly, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I felt like I was trapped in some sort of nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. Pregnant? And not even sure if it was mine? This was too much. I was already struggling to decide whether to stay in the marriage, and now this? I wasn't sure what to do. All I knew was that things had just gotten way more complicated. Next up, I'll tell you what I decided to do after that bombshell dropped. Trust me, it didn't get any easier from here. The bombshell of Sarah's possible pregnancy left me in a state of shock. I spent the next few days just going through the motions, working, eating, sleeping, while my mind kept looping back to that one haunting question. Is it mine? Sarah kept her distance. She didn't push me to talk, and honestly, I think she was just as freaked out as I was. The tension in the house was unbearable. Every time I saw her, I could feel this unspoken weight between us, but neither of us knew what to say anymore. A few days after she dropped the news, she came to me, holding a pregnancy test. I haven't taken it yet, she said softly. I wanted to wait until you were ready to, I don't know, face it with me. I stared at her, unsure of what to say. Part of me didn't want to know the result. What if it was positive? What if it wasn't mine? I wasn't ready for that kind of reality, but I couldn't avoid it forever. Okay, I finally muttered. Let's get it over with. Sarah nodded, and without another word, she went into the bathroom. I sat on the couch, feeling like my entire life was hanging on the outcome of a little plastic stick. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, she came out, holding the test with a blank expression. It's positive, she whispered, her voice trembling. I felt my chest tighten. There it was, confirmation. But the worst part? We still didn't know if the baby was mine or Dan's. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing with all the possible scenarios. If the baby was mine, could I forgive her and raise it together? Or would the knowledge of her betrayal always be between us? And if it wasn't mine, well, I didn't even want to think about that. Sarah sat down next to me, tears welling up in her eyes. Jake, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. Her words broke something in me. I stood up abruptly, unable to sit still anymore. I don't know what to do either, Sarah, I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. You've put me in an impossible situation. How am I supposed to move forward with this? She sobbed quietly, but I didn't feel any sympathy this time. Not now. She had made her choices, and now I was stuck dealing with the fallout. I needed space to think, to figure out what I wanted, and what I could even handle. That night, I packed a bag and told her I was going to stay with Matt for a few days. I couldn't bear being in that house any longer. She didn't try to stop me. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face as I walked out the door. When I got to Matt's, I finally told him everything. The affair, the pregnancy, the fact that we didn't even know if the baby was mine. He sat there in stunned silence for a moment before shaking his head. Damn, Jake. I don't even know what to say. That's rough, man. Yeah, I muttered, running my hands through my hair. I don't know what to do, Matt. I don't even know where to start. Do you still love her? He asked after a long pause. I didn't answer right away. Did I still love Sarah? I wasn't sure anymore. The betrayal, the lies, the uncertainty about the baby, it had all taken its toll. I wasn't even sure I knew who she was anymore. I don't know, I admitted quietly. I really don't know. Matt nodded. Look, man, no one can make this decision for you. You have to figure out what's best for you. But don't rush it. Take the time you need. And that's exactly what I did. Over the next few days, I stayed at Matt's, thinking, reflecting, trying to sort out my emotions. I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go back to how things were. Too much had changed. Next, I had to decide whether I wanted to know the truth about the baby's paternity, and whether I could ever rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It was time to face some hard truths. Stay tuned for what happened next. It wasn't what I expected. The more I thought about it, the clearer one thing became. I needed to know. I couldn't live with the uncertainty. I had to find out whether the baby was mine or Dan's. No matter how painful the answer might be, I couldn't move forward without it. A few days after staying with Matt, I went back to the house to talk to Sarah. She looked drained, like the weight of everything was finally hitting her. I could tell she had been crying a lot, but honestly, I wasn't in a place to comfort her. We had bigger things to deal with. I think we need to get a paternity test, I said, not wasting any time. She blinked at me, her face falling. You really think that's necessary? I gave her a look. What do you think? You slept with someone else, Sarah. I can't just assume the baby's mine. I need to know for sure. She nodded, looking defeated. Okay, I understand. I'll set it up. The next few days were tense. We barely spoke, only discussing the logistics of getting the test done. I could tell she wanted to talk about the bigger picture about us, our future, but I wasn't ready. I needed to know the truth before I could even think about where we stood. Finally, the day came for the test. We went to the clinic together, sitting in the waiting room in awkward silence. Sarah kept glancing at me like she wanted to say something, but I avoided her gaze. My mind was too focused on what was about to happen. The test itself was quick. They took samples from both of us, told us we'd get the results in about a week, and then sent us on our way. It was strange how something that took only a few minutes could hold so much weight. That week was one of the longest of my life. I stayed at Matt's again, unable to be in the same house as Sarah. We both needed space. Every day felt like I was walking through a fog, waiting for the call that would determine my future. Finally, the results came in. Sarah texted me to let me know they had arrived, and I told her I'd come by to read them together. My heart was pounding as I walked up to the house, my mind racing with every possible outcome. When I got there, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of her. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with fear and guilt. Neither of us said a word as I sat down across from her. You want to open it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, reaching for the envelope with shaky hands. I ripped it open, my breath catching in my throat as I pulled out the paper. The words blurred in front of me for a second, but then I saw it, the result. The baby was mine. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with a strange sadness. Yes, the baby was mine, but that didn't erase everything that had happened. The betrayal was still there, lingering between us like a shadow. Sarah started crying. I'm so sorry, Jake. I know I messed up. I didn't think it would get this far. I didn't respond right away. My mind was still processing everything. The baby was mine. That meant we were connected, whether I liked it or not. But did that mean we could fix our marriage? Could I ever trust her again? I need time to think, I finally said, standing up. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Jake, please don't walk away. But I had to. I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. I needed space to figure out what my next move would be, now that I knew the truth. I left the house that day with more clarity, but also more confusion. The paternity test gave me one answer, but it didn't solve the deeper issue of whether I could stay in this marriage after everything that had happened. The next step? Figuring out if I could rebuild trust, or if it was time to walk away for good. After finding out the baby was mine, I thought I'd feel more relieved. In a way, I was. But the weight of everything Sarah had done still hung over me like a cloud I couldn't shake. I had clarity about the baby, but there was no clarity about us. The big question still remained. Could I ever trust her again? I spent the next few days completely avoiding Sarah. I knew it wasn't fair to leave her hanging, but I wasn't ready to talk. I had to figure out what I wanted. Matt kept telling me I didn't owe her anything, but it wasn't that simple. We were married. There was history, a bond, now a baby. This wasn't just something I could walk away from without serious thought. One night, Matt and I sat on his porch, beers in hand, talking about everything. I just don't know if I can ever believe her again, I said, staring out at the dark yard. How do you come back from something like this? Matt was quiet for a moment before he replied. You don't have to. You don't owe her forgiveness just because of the baby. But if you want to try, it's going to take time. A lot of time. And she has to be all in. You can't be the only one trying. That stuck with me. If there was any hope for saving our marriage, it wasn't just about whether I wanted to give her another chance. It was about whether Sarah was willing to fight for it too. And so far, her apologies had been hollow, like she was just trying to patch things up without really understanding how deep the wound went. I decided it was time to sit down with her and lay everything on the table. We needed a real conversation, no more dancing around the issue. I texted her the next morning and told her I'd be by that evening. When I walked into the house, Sarah was sitting on the couch, looking nervous. I sat down across from her, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was heavy, but I broke it first. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I said bluntly. "You've lied to me for months. You slept with someone else, Sarah. That doesn't just go away because the baby's mine." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know, Jake. I don't expect it to just go away. I know I hurt you, and I can't take that back. But I want to make it right. I'll do anything, therapy, whatever you need. I don't want to lose you." I didn't say anything at first. Her words sounded genuine, but I couldn't help but wonder if it was just desperation talking. She was scared of being alone, scared of raising the baby without me, and I got that. But fear wasn't enough to fix what she had broken. "I need more than just words, Sarah," I said after a long pause. "I need to see that you're willing to put in the work. If I stay, it's not going to be easy. I'm going to question everything for a long time. And you can't get defensive or act like I'm the problem." She nodded again, wiping away her tears. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." I wasn't convinced yet, but it was a start. I told her I was willing to try, but that we needed to go to therapy together and separately. She agreed, and I could tell she was relieved that I wasn't walking away completely. But here's the thing. Just because I said I'd try doesn't mean I was ready to forgive her. Far from it. The road ahead was going to be long, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. I didn't even know if we'd make it through. That night, I went back to Matt's place. I wasn't ready to move back in yet, and I needed more time to think about everything. But at least now we had a plan, a way forward, even if it was uncertain. In the coming weeks, therapy would test both of us. Stay tuned for how that went, because it wasn't as smooth as either of us hoped. A week later, Sarah and I started therapy. We found a couples counselor who specialized in helping people through infidelity. And while I wasn't thrilled about opening up to a stranger, I knew it was our best shot at saving what little was left of our marriage. The first session was awkward, to say the least. We sat there in silence until the therapist, Dr. Morgan, encouraged us to talk. Sarah spoke first. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice small. "I've told Jake how sorry I am, but I don't know what else I can say. I just want to make things right." Dr. Morgan nodded, turning to me. "Jake, how do you feel about that?" I could feel my jaw tighten. "She's sorry, sure, but that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the months of lies, the sneaking around, the betrayal. It's not just the act itself. It's the fact that I can't trust her anymore." Sarah looked down, tears welling up again. I knew she was sorry, but I couldn't help feeling like I was the one being forced to make all the sacrifices. I was the one who had to rebuild trust, and she didn't seem to understand how hard that would be. The first few sessions didn't do much, honestly. We mostly rehashed everything I already knew. Sarah apologized, I vented, and Dr. Morgan tried to keep the conversation productive. But it felt like we were stuck in a loop. The more we talked about the affair, the more I realized just how much damage had been done. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure if I wanted to fix it anymore. Then came the next blow. After one of our sessions, I came home and Sarah was already there. I noticed her phone buzz on the counter, and out of instinct, I glanced at it. It was a message from Dan. I felt my blood run cold. Why was she still in contact with him? Without saying anything, I picked up her phone and opened the message. It wasn't anything explicit, just a short, casual text. "Hey, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay." I stood there, staring at the screen, my hands shaking. After everything we had been through, she was still talking to him? When Sarah walked into the room and saw me with her phone, Her face went pale. Jake, wait. I didn't let her finish. You're still talking to him? I said, my voice low but filled with rage. After all of this, you're still in contact with the guy who ruined our marriage? It's not like that, she said quickly, reaching for her phone. He just texted me to check in. I didn't even respond. I threw the phone onto the couch, disgusted. How am I supposed to believe that, Sarah? You've lied about him for months. How do I know you're not lying again? She stepped closer, her eyes desperate. I swear, I'm not talking to him. I blocked his number after that text came in. I didn't even want to respond. I shook my head, feeling the last thread of trust one had left snap. You don't get it, do you? Every time I start to think we can fix this, you show me that I can't trust you. You should have told me he texted you. You should have been honest. She started crying again, but it didn't affect me like it used to. I was tired of the tears, tired of the apologies that didn't mean anything. Jake, please, I'm trying, she sobbed. I didn't think it was a big deal. That's the problem, Sarah. You never think it's a big deal until I catch you. I grabbed my keys and left the house. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed space again. It was like every time we made the slightest bit of progress, something came along to tear it all down. I stayed at Matt's again that night, thinking about the future. This wasn't working. Therapy wasn't fixing the core problem, which was that I simply didn't trust her. And how could I? Even with a baby on the way, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe we were beyond repair. In the next session, I had to face the hardest question yet. Was there really anything left to save? Stay tuned. The next step? Making a decision I wasn't ready for. The next therapy session was rough. I came in with everything from the last few days boiling under the surface. The message from Dan, Sarah's constant apologies, the back-and-forth trust issues. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was going to magically fix itself with a few sessions of therapy. Dr. Morgan could feel it too. As soon as we sat down, the tension in the room was thick. Sarah was the first to speak, like she always was. Jake, I know I messed up again, but I'm doing my best. I blocked Dan, I swear. I didn't think it was important to tell you because I didn't respond. I was tired of hearing the same excuses. That's the problem, Sarah. You don't think about how this affects me, how I'm supposed to rebuild trust when you're still hiding things. You're not giving me any reason to believe you're done with him, or that you've really changed. Dr. Morgan leaned forward, sensing this was different from our usual arguments. Jake, it sounds like you've reached a point where you're questioning if there's any trust left to rebuild. Is that accurate? I stared at the floor, trying to find the right words. Yeah, that's exactly it. I don't think I can do this anymore. Every time I try to move forward, something else comes up. I'm exhausted mentally and emotionally. I don't think there's anything left to rebuild. Sarah's face crumpled, her eyes wide with panic. Jake, no, please. Don't say that. We're getting somewhere, aren't we? We've been going to therapy. I'm trying to fix this. Please, don't give up on us. Her voice was desperate, but something inside me had shifted. I didn't feel the same pull to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay. I didn't even know if I believed that anymore. I sighed, looking up at her, my voice calm but firm. I'm not giving up, Sarah. You gave up when you started lying, when you let this happen with Dan. And I've tried. I've really tried. But I can't keep living like this, constantly wondering if you're telling me the truth. Dr. Morgan nodded, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. Jake, it sounds like you've come to a decision. I swallowed hard, knowing what I was about to say was going to change everything. Yeah, I think I have. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. I can't trust her, and I don't think I ever will. Sarah broke down in tears, sobbing uncontrollably, but I didn't flinch. This time, I wasn't the one trying to patch things up. I wasn't the one trying to carry the weight of a broken marriage. I had carried it long enough, and I couldn't keep doing it. I'm sorry, I said softly, standing up. But this is over. I walked out of the therapist's office, leaving Sarah behind with Dr. Morgan, still crying. It felt surreal, like everything had been leading to this moment, but now that it had happened, I didn't feel the way I thought I would. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't angry. I was just tired. Back at Matt's place that night, I sat alone on the porch, replaying everything in my head. 7 years of marriage gone. A baby on the way, but no future with the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. It felt like failure, even though I knew deep down that staying would have been worse. I realized something important that night. Sometimes, no matter how much you want to save something, it's already gone. You can't rebuild a relationship if the foundation is shattered, and ours had been broken long before I ever found out about Dan. The affair was just the final blow. Now, I had to figure out what came next, how to navigate this new reality, how to be a father without being in this marriage. It was terrifying, but at least I had clarity. At least I had made a decision. Next, I'll talk about how I handled the fallout, the separation, the plans for the baby, and moving forward on my own. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way. After I walked out of the therapist's office, everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. The decision to end things with Sarah had been coming for a while, but now that it was real, I had to deal with the fallout. The next few days were a whirlwind of painful conversations, legal paperwork, and the slow, sad realization that this chapter of my life was officially over. When I got home that night, I told Sarah we needed to sit down and talk about the logistics of separating. She looked wrecked, red-eyed, drained, but I couldn't let myself soften. I had to focus on what was next. We need to figure out how to handle this, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. There's the house, the baby, everything. We can't just avoid it. She nodded, sniffling as she wiped her eyes. I know, but I don't want to lose you, Jake. I'll do whatever it takes. That hit me hard, but I stayed firm. It's too late for that, Sarah. We've tried, but I can't live like this anymore. We need to think about what's best for both of us. And for the baby, we decided to work with a mediator to help divide things up, hoping to keep it as civil as possible. We talked about co-parenting, and even though the thought of not being there every day for my child was gut-wrenching, I knew it was the right thing to do. The baby deserved a stable environment, and our marriage was far from stable. The next few weeks were a blur of tough conversations and legal steps. We agreed that Sarah would keep the house for now, at least until after the baby was born. I couldn't imagine living there with all the memories and broken trust weighing me down. I moved out and found a small apartment nearby. It wasn't much, but it gave me the space I needed to start over. Matt helped me pack up my things, and as we loaded the last box into his truck, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, fear. Mostly, though, I felt like I was finally breathing again, even if the air was a little thin. Sarah and I kept things civil, at least on the surface. But every time we talked about the baby, the house, or the future, it was like walking on eggshells. I could see the regret in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if it was because she was sorry for what she did, or because she didn't expect me to leave. There were moments when I wondered if I was making the right decision. The idea of being a single dad, raising a child while juggling everything else, terrified me. But then I'd remember why I left. The lies, the betrayal, the constant doubt that had eaten away at me for months. I couldn't go back to that. One afternoon, a few weeks after the move, Sarah called me and asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, even though I wasn't sure what she wanted to talk about. When I got there, she looked more composed than I'd seen her in a while, but there was a sadness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. I just wanted to say, "I understand why you left," she said quietly. "I know I broke your trust, and I'll have to live with that. But I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to be a good mom. I don't want to make things harder for you." I nodded, grateful for the maturity in her response. "I appreciate that, Sarah. We both have to do what's best for the baby now. That's the most important thing." We talked for a while longer, making plans for how we'd co-parent and share responsibilities when the baby came. It wasn't easy, but it was the first time we'd talked without anger or hurt hanging over us. When I left that day, I felt a sense of closure. I knew the road ahead would still be hard. There would be sleepless nights, tough decisions, and moments of doubt. But I also knew I had made the right choice. The weight of trying to fix something that was already broken was finally off my shoulders. Next, I'll dive into what it was like preparing for fatherhood while navigating life on my own. The mix of excitement and fear was overwhelming, but it was a new beginning. Preparing for fatherhood on my own was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. After everything that had happened, it was hard to believe that in just a few months I was going to be a dad. The idea of raising a child without being in a stable marriage terrified me, but at the same time, it gave me a sense of purpose. I needed to focus on the future, on being the best father I could be, no matter how rocky things had been with Sarah. I threw myself into preparing. I spent hours reading parenting books, watching videos, and talking to every dad I knew for advice. Matt, who had kids of his own, was a huge help. He reassured me that no one is ever really ready for fatherhood, but that I'd figure it out along the way. It was comforting, but I still couldn't shake the fear of messing everything up. Meanwhile, Sarah and I kept things as civil as possible. We met regularly to discuss the baby, doctor's appointments, baby supplies, and how we'd divide our time once the baby arrived. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when the hurt and betrayal felt fresh. But for the most part, we kept the focus on the baby. One day, while setting up a crib in my apartment, I had a moment of realization. I was doing this on my own now, but that didn't mean I was alone. I had support from family, friends, and even Sarah, despite everything. The idea of raising a child without being in a relationship wasn't as daunting as it had once seemed. It was my new normal, and I was finally okay with that. The day finally came when Sarah went into labor. I'll never forget the mixture of panic and excitement that hit me when she called, telling me it was time. I rushed to the hospital, not sure what to expect, but knowing I needed to be there. When I arrived, Sarah was already in the delivery room, and everything happened so fast. And then just like that, our baby girl, Emma, was born. I can't describe the feeling of holding her for the first time. All the fear, the anger, the doubts, they faded away in that moment. She was perfect. This tiny, fragile person who had no idea what had been happening between her parents, no idea of the mess her arrival had been surrounded by. She just needed love and care, and I was determined to give her that. In the weeks that followed, I found myself adjusting to fatherhood in ways I hadn't expected. The late-night feedings, the diaper changes, the endless worry about whether I was doing things right. It was exhausting, but it was also fulfilling in a way I couldn't have imagined. Emma became my focus, my reason to keep moving forward. Sarah and I managed to co-parent without too much drama. We kept things structured and focused on Emma's needs. It wasn't easy, but we made it work. Over time, the anger between us dulled, replaced by a kind of mutual respect for the roles we had to play. We weren't together and we never would be again, but we were both committed to being good parents for Emma. Looking back on everything now, I've learned a lot. Life doesn't always go the way you plan. Sometimes, people you trust let you down in ways you never saw coming. But it's not the end. You can rebuild, even if it's on your own. And sometimes, the thing that feels like the end of your world is just the beginning of a new chapter. So, if you're reading this and you're going through something similar, my advice is this: take your time. Don't rush decisions out of fear or anger. Trust yourself to know when it's time to let go and move on. It's going to hurt, but you'll get through it. And once you do, you'll find that there's more waiting for you on the other side than you ever expected. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. Here's to new beginnings.